At my husband's packed funeral, my daughter-in-law stood up and, with a hand on her stomach, announced she was pregnant with his baby. The room gasped. My son collapsed, but I just smiled. She thought she'd won everything, but she had no idea she was walking right into a trap my husband and I had perfectly laid. This story will leave you speechless. Like, share, and tell me the city you're listening from. The heavy scent of lilies and sorrow clung to the air in St. Michael's Church, a suffocating blanket woven with hushed whispers and unspoken grief. Eleanor Vance, a woman now carrying the unwelcome title of widow, felt the weight of it all pressing down on her chest. Her husband Arthur was gone, 64 years old, and a sudden, brutal heart attack had ripped him from her side, leaving a gaping wound where 38 years of shared laughter, quiet evenings, and unwavering love had once resided. The emptiness felt vast, cold, and utterly incomplete. Arthur, a retired history teacher, had been more than just a husband. He was the bedrock of their small family, a man whose gentle wisdom and warm humor had touched countless lives. The packed pews bore testament to his impact. Students, colleagues, neighbors. They were all here, their faces etched with the same disbelief that still plagued Eleanor. He was gone, and the world suddenly felt a shade too dim, a note too flat. As the ceremony progressed, Eleanor, enveloped in the somber velvet of the front pew, found her gaze repeatedly drawn to her daughter-in-law, Cassandra Hayes. Michael's wife sat beside her, a strange, almost manic energy radiating from her. While others wept or sat in solemn reflection, Cassandra seemed to be vibrating with an internal excitement. She kept checking her phone, a small, furtive gesture, then casting quick, almost triumphant glance in Eleanor's direction. It was unsettling, a discordant note in the symphony of shared grief, and it prickled at the edges of Eleanor's already frayed nerves. Something was off, terribly off. Then came Michael. Her son, her strong, kind Michael, stepped up to the podium. His voice, though thick with emotion, resonated with genuine love as he delivered a heartfelt eulogy for Arthur. Arthur had become Michael's stepfather when he was just 7, a quiet, steady presence who had seamlessly woven himself into their lives, filling a void Michael hadn't even known he had. He spoke of Arthur's patience, his passion for history, the way he could make the past come alive with a single story, and the quiet strength he instilled in his stepson. Tears streamed down Michael's face, mirroring the grief of many in the room. Just as Michael concluded, his voice breaking on a final choked, "I'll miss you, Dad." Cassandra rose. The movement was sudden, attention-grabbing, and completely unexpected. Eleanor's stomach plummeted, a cold dread washing over her. Cassandra wasn't scheduled to speak. This wasn't right. Cassandra moved with an unnatural grace, her usually sharp features softened by what she clearly intended to be a look of profound sorrow, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She reached the podium, positioning herself beside Michael, who looked utterly bewildered by her sudden appearance. She cleared her throat, her voice, usually sharp and clear, taking on a theatrical, almost reverent tone. "I have something to share with you all," Cassandra began, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces in the congregation. She paused, letting the silence build, a master manipulator of timing. "Something beautiful that will help us all remember Arthur." A ripple of confused murmurs passed through the room. What could she possibly mean? Then, with a gesture so dramatic it felt rehearsed, Cassandra placed a hand protectively over her slightly rounded stomach. Her eyes, shining with an inexplicable triumph, met Eleanor's for a fleeting second before returning to the wider audience. "Arthur and I," she declared, her voice swelling with emotion, "we shared something special, something that will keep his memory alive forever." The air in the church thickened, the silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure. Eleanor watched, an icy certainty forming in her gut. She knew, even before Cassandra uttered the words, what was coming. It was a macabre, grotesque thought, but Cassandra had always been audacious, ruthless in her pursuit of advantage. Then came the bombshell, delivered with a saccharine smile and a quiver in her voice that was meant to convey vulnerability, but to Eleanor screamed malice. "I'm pregnant," Cassandra announced, her eyes glistening. She paused again, letting the weight of the words hang in the air, allowing the shock to permeate every corner of the room. with Arthur's baby. A collective gasp, loud and visceral, erupted from the assembled mourners. It was a sound of disbelief, horror, and utter confusion. Michael, who had been standing next to Cassandra, swayed precariously, his face already streaked with tears when ashen. His eyes, wide with betrayal and agony, fixed on Cassandra, then darted to Eleanor, as if seeking confirmation of this unthinkable nightmare. Then, with a guttural cry, he collapsed onto the pew, burying his face in his hands as silent, wrenching sobs racked his frame. Cassandra, seemingly unfazed by the chaos she had unleashed, bent down to gently touch Michael's shoulder, a gesture that felt utterly performative. "I know this is a shock," she murmured, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I just found out yesterday myself. I wanted everyone to know, right away, that there's still a part of Arthur with us." She straightened up, her gaze once more meeting Eleanor's, a look of unadulterated triumph flashing in her eyes. Amidst the swirling storm of gasps, whispers, and Michael's heartbroken sobs, Eleanor felt a strange, almost imperceptible shift within herself. The initial shock quickly gave way to a cold, hard resolve. A small, knowing smile, invisible to anyone but perhaps Arthur himself, formed on her lips. She had known Cassandra was a manipulator, a woman who saw dollar signs where others saw relationships. But this? This was a new low, even for her. Eleanor reached for Michael, pulling him gently into her side, stroking his hair as he wept. "It's going to be okay, honey," she whispered, her voice steady and firm, a silent promise echoing in the words. "I promise you, everything is going to be okay." She looked up, her gaze meeting Cassandra's once more. The younger woman, basking in her moment of calculated chaos, returned the look with a smirk, completely unaware that she had just walked right into the meticulously laid trap Eleanor and Arthur had so carefully set. The funeral service dissolved into a chaotic blend of murmured sympathies and outright scandal. The sanctity of the church shattered by Cassandra's audacious announcement. Michael, her beloved son, remained slumped against Eleanor, his shoulders shaking with a grief that now seemed intertwined with a profound betrayal. Eleanor held him, her heart aching for his pain, but a steely resolve had settled deep within her. She knew Cassandra, knew the calculating mind that lay beneath the veneer of charm, a mind honed over 5 years of marriage to Michael. Cassandra had entered their lives like a hurricane, beautiful and disruptive. She'd married Michael at a time when Arthur's small construction business was experiencing an unprecedented boom. Arthur, a shrewd and dedicated man, had worked tirelessly, building his company from the ground up, and then, recognizing the perfect moment, sold it for a substantial sum, allowing for an early, comfortable retirement. He was financially well off, owning their spacious house outright, possessing a healthy portfolio of investments, substantial savings, and a life insurance policy that would ensure Eleanor's security for decades to come. Cassandra, Eleanor suspected, had seen all of this long before she ever saw Michael's heart. Eleanor had observed Cassandra's behavior for years, the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in her demeanor, the way her eyes lingered on Arthur's expensive watches, or the tasteful antiques in their home. There were countless instances that, in isolation, might have seemed innocuous. Cassandra accidentally finding Arthur's wallet and leafing through its contents, always claiming she was looking for a grocery list. The casual, probing questions about Arthur's will, disguised as concern for his health, the way she would subtly angle to be the one to collect the mail, her fingers lingering on official-looking envelopes. Arthur, too, had noticed. He was a kind man, but not a fool. He had recognized the avarice beneath Cassandra's polished facade. So when Cassandra had stood at the pulpit, hand on her stomach, declaring her pregnancy with Arthur's baby, Eleanor had felt that initial shock, yes, but it was quickly eclipsed by a chilling clarity. This wasn't grief-stricken revelation. It was a strategic move, a calculated strike to claim a significant portion of Arthur's estate. A posthumous child, if proven to be Arthur's, would grant Cassandra control of a substantial inheritance for at least 18 years, a future paved with Arthur's hard-earned money. It was a perfectly executed, albeit monstrous, plan. But Arthur, Eleanor reflected with a small, secret pang of pride and sadness, had figured out her game months ago. They had spent many quiet evenings discussing it, piecing together Cassandra's subtle machinations, sharing a grim humor about her transparent attempts to probe their finances. Together, they had planned for this exact scenario, for her brazen attempt to insert herself further into their legacy. The trap, as Eleanor had whispered to Michael, was already set. The graveside service was a blur. Michael, supported by Eleanor and other family members, could barely stand, his face a mask of utter devastation. Cassandra, however, maintained her act with unwavering dedication. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, leaning heavily on Michael's arm, projecting the image of a grieving pregnant widow, her vulnerability a carefully constructed shield. But Eleanor, her senses sharpened by grief and suspicion, watched. As the casket was lowered and the final prayers were spoken, Cassandra, believing herself unobserved, pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen. Eleanor, with her years of practice and subtle observation, caught a glimpse of the recipient, Nolan, and then the message, stark and chillingly precise. Phase 1 complete. Meeting tomorrow to discuss next steps. A cold certainty settled in Eleanor's heart. This wasn't sorrow. This was a business plan meticulously executed, designed to exploit Arthur's death for financial gain. Nolan, whoever he was clearly an accomplice in this monstrous charade. In the days that followed, Cassandra cemented her position. She announced that she would temporarily move into Eleanor's house, ostensibly to help Eleanor through her difficult time. Eleanor knew better. It was about establishing residency, about strengthening her claim to Arthur's estate, about solidifying her role as the grieving daughter-in-law and expectant mother. The performance began immediately. Cassandra developed an Oscar-worthy repertoire of symptoms. There were the sudden bouts of morning sickness, strategically timed for when guests were present, followed by dramatic rushes to the bathroom, where the sounds of retching were always just loud enough to be heard. She complained of debilitating backaches, the exhaustion of early pregnancy, and the emotional toll of carrying Arthur's child. She'd slump dramatically into armchairs, clutching her stomach with a fragile hand, sighing heavily. Eleanor watched it all, her expression carefully neutral, while inside a grim amusement mixed with disgust. She had raised 2 children, had experienced 2 pregnancies herself. She knew the genuine signs, the subtle shifts in a woman's body, the particular glow, the authentic exhaustion, the specific nature of morning sickness. Cassandra's performance was, to Eleanor's experienced eye, a clumsy, amateurish imitation. The sudden onset of symptoms, the theatrical timing, the lack of any actual physical changes beyond a slight, deliberate protrusion of her stomach, it all screamed fake. Every exaggerated sigh, every feigned wince, every carefully produced retching sound confirmed Eleanor's suspicion. Cassandra was not pregnant. Not with Arthur's baby, and perhaps not with anyone's. The ink on Arthur's death certificate was barely dry before Cassandra's true agenda began to unfurl with an alarming swiftness. She didn't waste a moment in mourning. Instead, she moved straight into the next phase of her elaborate charade, extracting money from Michael for her phantom pregnancy. Her demands began subtly, cloaked in the guise of maternal concern. The day after the funeral, with Michael still reeling from the shock, Cassandra approached him with a carefully rehearsed fragility. "Michael, darling," she cooed, her voice soft and laced with a manufactured vulnerability. "I know you're hurting, but I need to be proactive for our baby. My doctor recommends a specialist for high-risk pregnancies, especially at my age." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "It's $500 for the initial consultation. Can you wire it to my account today? I have an appointment, but I need to go alone, to focus on the baby. It's best if you're at work. No need for you to take more time off." Michael, numb with grief and confusion, nodded automatically, reaching for his wallet. Elsheiner, observing from the kitchen, felt a chill. Cassandra had deliberately scheduled this appointment for a time when Michael would be occupied, ensuring no scrutiny. The next day, it was special vitamins. "My specialist says these are crucial," Cassandra announced, holding up an expensive-looking bottle she'd clearly just purchased. "Pregnancy after 40 is so complicated. It requires extra care. These are $300. Again, Michael, overwhelmed and desperate to believe in the life his father had supposedly created, acquiesced without question. A few days later, the demand escalated. "I absolutely have nothing to wear," Cassandra lamented dramatically, parading in a dress that suddenly seemed too tight around her abdomen. She patted her stomach with a sigh. "I'm showing so quickly, and the specialist thinks it might even be twins. We need proper maternity clothes, something respectable. That'll be $700 just to start." She made sure to choose a time when Mrs. Henderson, their nosy next-door neighbor, was visiting, a perfect witness to her expanding pregnancy and Michael's supposed generosity. Within a single week, Cassandra had extorted well over $1,500 from Michael for a pregnancy that existed only in her fertile imagination. Eleanor watched in disgusted fascination, a silent witness to Cassandra's calculated cruelty. This wasn't just about money, though. Eleanor understood that Cassandra was meticulously building a compelling narrative, collecting witnesses to her supposed pregnancy and Arthur's alleged involvement. Cassandra began inviting Arthur's elderly friends, men and women who had known him for decades, over for coffee and sympathy. She would sit with them, a picture of tearful vulnerability, clutching her abdomen, her voice trembling as she spoke of Arthur. "He was so excited about the baby," she would lament, her eyes welling up with carefully crafted tears. "He couldn't wait to teach another child how to fish, just like he taught Michael." Eleanor had to bite back a sharp retort. Arthur, bless his heart, had detested fishing. He tolerated it for Michael when he was little, but the idea of him gleefully anticipating teaching another child to fish was laughably, painfully false. Yet, Arthur's elderly friends, overcome with grief for their departed friend and swayed by Cassandra's performance, fell for it completely. They rallied around her, showering her with baby gifts, offers to help decorate a nursery, and endless words of encouragement for Arthur's last gift. Meanwhile, Michael was falling apart. The loss of Arthur, his rock, his stepfather who had loved him unconditionally, was devastating enough. But the added layer of betrayal, the image of his father having an affair with his wife, was tearing him to shreds. He was a shell of his former self, his eyes haunted, his movements slow and listless. He would often seek out Eleanor, his voice raw with pain. "I don't understand how this happened, Mom," he confessed one evening, his head in his hands. "When? How long were they? Was I so blind?" He looked at Eleanor, his gaze desperate for answers, for some explanation that could reconcile the Arthur he knew with this new heartbreaking image. Eleanor's heart ached for him, yearned to scoop him up and tell him the truth, to relieve him of this immense burden. But she was bound by her solemn promise to Arthur, a promise to wait, to let Cassandra fully expose her depravity before striking. So she offered him only vague comfort, carefully chosen words that wouldn't betray Arthur's plan. "Sometimes," she said, her voice soft but firm, "people we love disappoint us, Michael. They make mistakes, but that doesn't mean we stop loving them, or that their love for us was any less real." It was a double-edged statement, meant to reassure him of Arthur's genuine love, while also acknowledging the possibility of human fallibility. Michael, burdened with a crushing guilt that wasn't his to bear, even began to consider trying to understand Arthur and Cassandra's feelings. Maybe, he mused, his voice hollow, maybe Dad was lonely, or Cassandra was unhappy. People do desperate things sometimes, don't they? He was trying to rationalize the unthinkable, to find a narrative where his father wasn't simply a villain and his wife wasn't simply a monster. Eleanor watched him, her heart heavy. Cassandra had successfully twisted the narrative, portraying Arthur as a flawed, unfaithful man, driven by some hidden desire, and herself as a grieving, pregnant victim, a vessel for his final, illicit legacy. The stage was set, the audience captivated by her performance. But Eleanor knew the real play was yet to begin. Cassandra, having successfully spun her web of deceit and established herself as the grieving, pregnant widow, grew emboldened. Her triumph, however, was also her undoing. She grew greedy, overplaying her hand with an arrogance that Eleanor had anticipated. The subtle manipulations gave way to increasingly direct, financially motivated probing. The whispers began innocently enough. "This house," Cassandra remarked one evening, sighing dramatically as she gestured around the spacious living room, "it's awfully big for just one person, Eleanor. And with the baby coming, we'll need so much more space, for a nursery, for a nanny perhaps. The implications hung heavy in the air, a thinly veiled suggestion that Eleanor's sole occupancy of the family home was inefficient, perhaps even selfish. Then the casual mentions of Arthur's supposed intentions started. Arthur always said he wanted to take care of his children, Cassandra stated, her voice thoughtful, as if recalling a private, tender moment. All of his children. He was such a devoted father, wasn't he? She'd glance at Eleanor, a challenging glint in her eyes, testing the waters. The climax of her avarice came a few mornings later over a silent breakfast. Michael was at work, leaving Eleanor and Cassandra alone, a familiar tension hanging between them. Cassandra, after a dramatic sigh and a theatrical clutch of her abdomen, finally made her move. Eleanor, she began, her tone carefully modulated to sound concerned rather than rapacious. I think we should meet with Arthur's lawyer soon, just to make sure everything is properly arranged for the baby's future. It's so important that everything is in order, especially for a posthumous child. Her intention was crystal clear. Force a quick will reading. Cassandra wanted to secure her claim to Arthur's estate, to establish the unborn child's right to a substantial inheritance before Eleanor could contest it, before any doubts could be cast upon her fraudulent pregnancy. It was a bold, brazen play, but one that Eleanor recognized instantly as the moment Arthur had meticulously planned for. This was it. It was time. Eleanor met Cassandra's gaze, her own expression unreadable. A calm certainty settled over her. Yes, Cassandra, she replied, her voice steady. I agree. We absolutely should. I'll call Attorney Thompson this morning and schedule a meeting for next week. Cassandra struggled to contain her triumphant excitement. A wide, almost childlike grin spread across her face before she quickly tried to temper it, plastering on a more demure, appreciative expression. Her eyes, however, still danced with barely suppressed glee. She had pushed, and Eleanor had yielded. She thought she had won. That's wonderful, Eleanor, Cassandra enthused, her voice a little too bright. I'm so relieved. Arthur would have wanted us to be proactive. Indeed, Eleanor said, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. She picked up her teacup, savoring the warmth against her fingers. Arthur left some very specific instructions, He always was a man who planned for every eventuality. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. I imagine his arrangements will be quite illuminating. A flicker of uncertainty, a fleeting shadow of something that might have been fear, crossed Cassandra's eyes. Her smile wavered for a fraction of a second. The certainty in Eleanor's voice, the mention of specific instructions, seemed to prick at her carefully constructed confidence. But Cassandra had come too far, had invested too much in this monstrous charade to back down now. She quickly recomposed herself, her veneer of demure concern snapping back into place. I'm sure whatever Arthur decided will be fair, Cassandra said cautiously, her tone just a shade less confident than before. Eleanor merely responded with the same small, knowing smile she had worn at the funeral, a smile that Cassandra had mistaken for shock, or perhaps even defeat. Oh, I'm counting on it, she said, her voice soft but imbued with an iron will. As Eleanor reached for the landline on the kitchen counter, her gaze flickered to Cassandra. For a fleeting instant, before Cassandra could mask it, her expression shifted. The sweet, concerned daughter-in-law vanished, replaced by the chilling visage of a calculating predator, her eyes sharp and utterly devoid of genuine emotion, watching Eleanor with an intensity that bordered on predatory. The moment was gone as quickly as it appeared. Cassandra, sensing she had been observed, quickly recomposed herself, her hand drifting to her stomach. I think I need to rest for a bit, she announced, her voice suddenly laced with feigned exhaustion. All this excitement isn't good for the baby. She rose and retreated to her room, leaving Eleanor alone in the quiet kitchen. Eleanor picked up the phone, her fingers finding the familiar numbers for Attorney Thompson's office. She dialed, a profound sense of admiration swelling within her for Arthur. Even in death, he was still 10 steps ahead of everyone else, his foresight a final, powerful testament to his character. The upcoming meeting at Attorney Thompson's office wouldn't be a simple Wally reading. It felt to Eleanor like the prelude to a trial. And Cassandra, for all her cunning, had no idea she was about to be the defendant. Do you feel the tension? The air is thick with anticipation, isn't it? This is where everything changes. Don't miss a single word of what's coming next. Keep watching, and if you're enjoying the ride, please like this story, share it with someone who loves a good twist, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of Eleanor's journey. The air in Attorney Thompson's oak-paneled office was thick with a palpable tension, far heavier than the usual solemnity of a will reading. Cassandra, always one for dramatics, was meticulously dressed in a flowing black dress designed to accentuate the slight, artificial curve of her abdomen. She constantly smoothed the fabric over her stomach, her movements slow and deliberate, feigning the fragility of a woman deeply in mourning and delicate in her condition. Michael sat beside her, his posture slumped, his face still bore the haunted look of a man who had been hit by a truck. He held Cassandra's hand, a gesture born more of habit and obligation than affection, his gaze fixed on the polished tabletop, unable to meet her eyes, the betrayal still raw and festering. Eleanor took her seat across from them, a quiet strength emanating from her. She wore Arthur's favorite blue dress, a simple, elegant garment he had always adored. As she settled into the leather chair, she felt his presence with her, a comforting warmth amidst the chilly atmosphere of the room. She looked at Michael, her heart aching for him, then at Cassandra, her expression carefully neutral, masking the storm of anticipation and righteous fury brewing within her. Attorney Thompson, a man whose silver hair and kind eyes belied a sharp legal mind, cleared his throat. He had been Arthur's lawyer for decades, a trusted friend as much as a legal counsel. His voice was grave as he began, "Thank you all for coming. Arthur, as many of you know, was a meticulous man, and he left very detailed instructions for this meeting. He was quite specific about the order of proceedings." He reached into a drawer and produced a sealed yellowed envelope, its edges slightly crinkled with age, yet pristine. "First," he announced, holding up the envelope for all to see, "Arthur asked me to read this letter. It's dated 3 months before his passing." He glanced at Cassandra, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Then at Eleanor, whose heart began to pound a steady rhythm in her chest. This was it, the moment Arthur had so meticulously planned, the culmination of their shared foresight. Attorney Thompson carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter. His voice, usually formal and clipped, softened with emotion as he began to read. "To my beloved family, if you are hearing this letter, then I am gone, and certain events have unfolded exactly as I predicted they would." Eleanor watched Cassandra's posture stiffen slightly. Michael, however, merely looked confused, his brow furrowed. Arthur's words continued, a gentle wave of his enduring love washing over Eleanor. "My dearest Eleanor, my rock, my partner for almost 4 decades. You are the steadfast center of my world, and my love for you is eternal." And Michael, the lawyer's voice shifted, imbued with Arthur's deep affection, "My son, in every way that matters, you have brought me more joy and pride than I could ever express." Eleanor felt a tear prick her eye, a bittersweet ache for the man who was gone, yet so powerfully present in his words. Michael's head lifted slightly, a flicker of bewildered hope in his eyes as he heard his father's unconditional love for him, unspoken for so long. Then Attorney Thompson's voice shifted, becoming serious, almost stern. Arthur's letter began to address difficult truths. "However," he read, his gaze now firmly fixed on Cassandra, "there are also matters of deception, manipulation, and greed that must be brought to light." Cassandra's carefully constructed composure momentarily faltered. A tremor ran through her, subtle but noticeable to Eleanor. Her eyes, which had been fixed on the letter, darted quickly to Eleanor, then back to the lawyer. "I have been aware," Arthur's letter continued, the words dropping like stones into the heavy silence, "that there are individuals who may attempt to exploit my death for financial gain, weaving elaborate fictions to serve their own selfish ends." Michael looked utterly confused now, glancing between Eleanor, whose face remained placid, and Cassandra, whose hand moved to her stomach, her fingers clenching the fabric of her dress. And then came the precise, devastating blow aimed with surgical precision at Cassandra's heart of lies. Arthur's letter stated without equivocation, "Specifically, I have reason to believe that after my death, claims will be made about a pregnancy, claims that are entirely false." The words hung in the air, a bell tolling the end of Cassandra's charade. Cassandra's face drained of color, turning an actually white, that rivaled the pages of the letter. Her eyes wide with a dawning horror fixed on Attorney Thompson, then on Eleanor, then on Michael. She looked as if she might faint. "What?" Michael whispered, his voice hoarse with a new, terrifying dawning of understanding. He looked at his wife, his eyes filled with growing horror, confusion giving way to a sickening realization. Attorney Thompson, his expression now completely devoid of emotion, reached into another drawer. He pulled out a small manila envelope, unsealed and clearly labeled. He placed it on the table between them. 3 weeks before his passing, Attorney Thompson stated, his voice clinical, Arthur engaged a private investigator to conduct a discrete DNA test. The sample was obtained from a hairbrush belonging to Miss Cassandra Hayes, which Arthur had observed her using at their home. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. The results, he concluded, looking directly at Cassandra, whose chest was heaving with silent, ragged breaths, definitively prove that Arthur Vance is not and cannot be the father of any child Cassandra Hayes might be carrying. A deafening silence descended upon Attorney Thompson's office, heavier and more profound than any that had come before. It swallowed the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant city noises, even the ragged breaths of Cassandra. Michael's hand, which had until moments ago been clutching Cassandra's, dropped as if burned. His head slowly lifted, his eyes, previously clouded by grief and confusion, now clearing with a horrifying clarity. "What the hell is going on?" Michael demanded, his voice low and guttural, filled with shock, disbelief, and a dawning, terrible horror. He looked from the DNA results on the table to Cassandra, whose face was a mask of stark terror. Cassandra finally found her voice, thin and reedy, laced with a desperate defensiveness. "This is ridiculous. Arthur, the baby isn't his. Obviously, I never said it was his." Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape, a loophole in the tightening net. Attorney Thompson, unperturbed by her flimsy denial, calmly adjusted his glasses. "Actually, Mrs. Hayes," he countered, his voice steady, "you announced at Arthur's funeral that you were pregnant with Arthur's child. We have statements from at least 17 witnesses to that effect." He gestured vaguely towards a thick file on his desk, implying a mountain of evidence. Cassandra tried to backtrack, her words tripping over each other in her haste. "I was emotional, grieving. People misunderstood. It was all a misunderstanding." She threw a pleading glance at Michael, but his face was set, unyielding. But Michael, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening precision, wasn't buying it. His voice, though still trembling, was firm. "Belle, you've been taking money from me for doctor's appointments, for special vitamins, for maternity clothes. You explicitly said the baby was Arthur's. You let everyone believe it." "I never explicitly said those words." Cassandra shrieked, her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack. "You just assumed." "Assumed?" Michael scoffed, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping him. "You placed your hand on your stomach and said you were pregnant with Arthur's baby in front of 300 people. What else was I supposed to think?" Cassandra's facade crumbled completely. Her shoulders slumped and her carefully crafted illusion of maternal grief vanished, replaced by an ugly, desperate frustration. "Okay, fine," she hissed, her voice barely audible. "Maybe I let people believe something that wasn't true. But I am pregnant, Michael. Just not with Arthur's baby." It was a desperate, last-ditch attempt to cling to some semblance of her lie. Attorney Thompson cleared his throat, a subtle, almost imperceptible sound that nonetheless commanded attention. "I'm afraid that's not accurate either, Mrs. Hayes." He reached for another folder, even thicker than the previous one. Arthur, being the thorough man he was, also arranged for a private investigator to document your activities over the past few months. He had concerns, as you can imagine. He slid a series of photographs across the table, images that painted a stark, undeniable picture. The first photograph showed Cassandra, not at a doctor's office, but at a Planned Parenthood clinic. The second, taken days later, depicted her at a bustling bar, a drink in hand, laughing with a man Eleanor didn't recognize. Another image showed her casually smoking a cigarette, a habit she vehemently denied in Eleanor's home, claiming pregnancy health. The final, most damning image was a medical report, clearly showing a recent visit to a doctor where she had specifically requested birth control pills. Cassandra shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. Her hand, which a moment ago had cradled her belly, now clutched her stomach in a pathetic, desperate gesture. "This is harassment!" she screamed, her voice cracking with fury and fear. "You can't spy on people like that. This is illegal." Attorney Thompson remained impeccably calm, his gaze unwavering. "On the contrary, Mrs. Hayes, when there is a strong suspicion of fraud, particularly involving an estate and the manipulation of a grieving family, such investigations are entirely legal and appropriate." Michael, propelled by an almost primal disgust, pushed his chair back, distancing himself physically from Cassandra. His voice, when it came, was a trembling whisper, filled with the raw agony of profound disillusionment. "You're not pregnant at all, are you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Cassandra stood there, her shoulders heaving, her eyes darting between Michael, Eleanor, and the damning evidence on the table. The silence stretched, an excruciating moment of absolute defeat. Then slowly, painfully, her hand dropped from her stomach, the illusion shattering completely. "Fine," she spat, her voice laced with venom, utterly defeated. "No, I'm not pregnant." She tried a desperate deflection, a last gasp of manipulation. "But you don't understand the whole situation. There are things about Arthur that you don't know, things I had to deal with." Eleanor, who had remained silent throughout the horrifying revelations, finally spoke. Her voice was firm, unwavering, devoid of any sympathy. "Had to lie?" she challenged, her gaze piercing Cassandra. "Had to manipulate my son? Had to try to steal from a dead man?" Cassandra whirled on Eleanor, her face contorted with rage, all pretense of gentility stripped away. Her true self, desperate, dangerous, and utterly exposed, was finally laid bare for everyone to see. Cassandra's desperate deflection was met with Eleanor's unwavering gaze, a gaze that stripped away her last vestiges of pretense. The anger simmering beneath Cassandra's carefully constructed exterior finally erupted. "You think you're so perfect, don't you, Eleanor?" She spat, her voice shrill and venomous, completely devoid of the sweetness she usually deployed. "You think Arthur was such a saint. There's plenty you don't know about him. Plenty of money he's been giving me for the past year. Promises he made." Michael, reeling from the successive shocks, was utterly stunned. "What money? What promises?" he stammered, his eyes wide with renewed disbelief and a fresh wave of betrayal. He looked from Cassandra to Eleanor, then to Attorney Thompson, desperate for answers, for anything that could explain the grotesque unraveling of his life. Attorney Thompson, a man seemingly unfazed by Cassandra's outburst, reached for yet another envelope, his movements precise and unhurried. "Arthur, it seems, anticipated this line of argument as well, Mrs. Hayes," he stated calmly, his voice cutting through Cassandra's hysteria. As he prepared to open the envelope, Cassandra, her mask completely fallen, began to back away, inching towards the door. Her eyes darted wildly, a hunted animal trapped in a corner. "I don't have to listen to this," she declared, her voice rising in pitch. "Whatever lies he told you, I'm not going to stand here and be humiliated by a dead man." Eleanor's voice was quiet, but it resonated with an undeniable authority. "The only lies," she said, her gaze pinning Cassandra in place, "are the ones you've been telling. But don't worry, dear, Arthur documented everything." Attorney Thompson then pulled out a small, discreet video camera, placing it carefully on his desk. He pressed play, and the screen flickered to life. Arthur's face filled the screen, larger than life, yet heartbreakingly familiar. He looked tired, lines of worry etched around his eyes, but his gaze was steady, determined. The recording was clearly made in his final weeks, capturing the essence of the man they had lost. Arthur's recorded voice began, calm and resonant. "If you're watching this, then Cassandra has made her move, and it's time for the truth." Cassandra froze in the doorway, caught in a terrible dilemma. Her desperate urge to flee battled with a morbid fascination, a need to witness the inevitable collapse of her carefully constructed world. She stood there, poised on the edge of escape, but utterly transfixed. "Dad?" Michael whispered, his voice barely audible, his face pale as he sank back into his chair. tears silently streaming down his cheeks. The sight of Arthur, alive and speaking, was a visceral punch, tearing open fresh wounds of grief, even as it offered the promise of devastating truth. Arthur's gaze, though recorded, seemed to bore directly into Michael. "Michael, son," he began, his voice filled with a profound sadness. "I need you to understand something. The woman you married is not who you think she is, and I'm about to prove it." The camera angle subtly shifted, revealing Arthur's study, the familiar books, the worn leather armchair, the very room where he had spent so many hours planning for this moment. It lent an undeniable authenticity to the recording. Arthur continued, his voice now tinged with a weariness that spoke of long-held concerns. "3 months ago, Cassandra approached me with what she called a business proposition." He paused, a wry, almost incredulous expression crossing his face. "She had, it seems, managed to gain unauthorized access to some of my financial assets. Not enough to cause significant damage, but enough to alarm me." He shook his head slowly. "Her proposition was to ensure her future security, as she so delicately put it." Michael made a choking sound, a mix of disbelief and horror. "She said that to you?" he gasped, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible understanding. "She offered you a business proposition?" Arthur's recorded voice confirmed it, a heavy weight of truth falling upon the room. "Indeed, Michael. She suggested that I update my will to include her, just in case," she said, "as if my death was merely a convenient contingency for her financial planning. She even had the audacity to suggest a specific percentage of my estate, explaining how it would be fair, given her contributions to the family." His face tightened with a mixture of disgust and profound disappointment. That was when I knew for certain what kind of person she truly was. Arthur's recorded voice, though calm, held a chilling clarity as he continued to expose Cassandra's true nature. "She explained her reasoning, quite dispassionately," he said on the screen. "She felt entitled," she claimed, "to a share of my estate for her loyalty to Michael and for the potential future contributions she might make to my family name." He paused, his expression hardening. "She chillingly stated that she could be very creative in establishing her right to inherit, specifically mentioning posthumous children." The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. Michael watched, utterly aghast, as the image of his father on screen revealed Cassandra's calculating coldness. Arthur's voice lowered, almost a conspiratorial whisper. "She highlighted the difficulty of disproving paternity with DNA when the alleged father is no longer alive, and the considerable legal and emotional burden such a claim would place on my grieving family." He took a deep, weary breath. "Her explicit plan, Michael, was to claim she was pregnant with my child after my death, knowing it would be incredibly difficult and expensive for my family to fight." Michael jumped to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His face was contorted with a furious rage he rarely displayed, his eyes burning into Cassandra, who stood frozen by the doorway. "You planned this before he even died?" he roared, his voice thick with agony and disbelief. "You were planning to claim you were pregnant with his baby while you were still married to me?" Cassandra, her back against the door, finally found her voice again, shrill and defensive. "He was old, Michael. He was sick. I needed security. You don't understand." Arthur's video continued, cutting through her desperate excuses. "It was then," he said, his expression grim, "that I realized Cassandra was far more dangerous than I had initially thought. I decided to play along, to let her believe she was successfully manipulating me into changing my will in her favor." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched Arthur's lips. What Cassandra didn't know, however, was that from that moment on, I was recording every conversation we had. Attorney Thompson, with a solemn nod, fast-forwarded through over 6 hours of recorded conversations, the digital display on the video camera whirring rapidly. He stopped on a segment just weeks before Arthur's death. On the screen, Cassandra was seated across from Arthur in his study, her posture relaxed, a sly smile on her face. "I'm just thinking ahead, Arthur," she cooed, her voice oozing false concern. "Providing for myself and any children I might have. It's only sensible." Arthur's voice from the recording was calm. "And if you were to claim such a pregnancy after my death?" Cassandra's predatory smile widened. "It would be very difficult to disprove, wouldn't it? DNA tests require samples from both parents, And without you, well, it becomes a messy legal battle. Expensive too. Most families just settle. Her laughter, light and cold, echoed in the silent office. Attorney Thompson stopped the video. The silence was absolute, broken only by Michael's ragged breathing. As you can see, Michael, the attorney said, his voice grave, Cassandra was not only planning this elaborate fraud while Arthur was still alive, but she was also detailing the legal loopholes she intended to exploit. He then revealed the worst part. He picked up a thick stack of glossy photographs from the private investigator's report, laying them out on the table. The images showed Cassandra not alone, but intimately involved with the man. It was Nolan King, the name Eleanor had seen on Cassandra's phone at the funeral. The photographs depicted them at various locations: a discreet motel on the outskirts of town, in a restaurant, kissing passionately in a car. Several photos showed them exchanging documents, their heads bent together in what appeared to be intense discussion. Nolan King, Attorney Thompson stated, his voice resonating with authority, is a paralegal specializing in inheritance law and estate fraud. He is currently under investigation by the state bar for allegedly assisting numerous individuals in making fraudulent claims against deceased estates. Cassandra, her face ashen, finally found her voice. Those photos are fake. They're doctored. I assure you, Mrs. Hayes, Attorney Thompson countered, these photographs have verified timestamps, and we have corroborating phone records, GPS data, and witness statements from the private investigator. Michael stared at the images, then at Cassandra, his heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. 8 months? He whispered, his voice broken, barely audible. You've been cheating on me for 8 months? With a fraud specialist? The full, horrifying realization hit him. Cassandra had married him for Arthur's money, and she had meticulously planned this fraud not alone, but with a professional accomplice. Then Arthur's final video message began to play, his voice now devoid of any sadness or weariness, replaced by an ice-cold, righteous fury. He looked directly at Cassandra, who stood frozen, unable to move. Cassandra Hayes, Arthur began, his eyes piercing. You have spent months attempting to extort from my family. You have manipulated my son, and you have attempted to steal from my estate after my death. You lied about a pregnancy. You faked symptoms. You orchestrated a public spectacle at my funeral, and you thought you were clever. A triumphant, grim smile touched Arthur's lips. But you made one crucial mistake. You assumed I was just a foolish old man, ripe for the picking. He leaned forward, his voice ringing with authority. What you failed to realize is that I documented every lie, every manipulation, every single criminal act you committed. I have submitted all of this evidence, along with your accomplice, Nolan King's involvement, to the district attorney's office. A warrant, I can assure you, has likely been issued for your arrest on charges of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy as we speak. Arthur's eyes, full of a fierce, final justice, seemed to burn into Cassandra's soul. You have failed, completely and utterly failed. My estate will go exactly where I always intended it to go, to my beloved wife, Eleanor, and my son, Michael. You will receive nothing. The video ended, the screen fading to black, leaving an echoing silence in the room. Cassandra, her face a mask of utter defeat and terror, let out a choked cry, whirled around, and bolted from the room, her heels clattering desperately down the hallway. Cassandra's frantic escape from Attorney Thompson's office was short-lived. As she burst into the lobby, her face tear-streaked and contorted with panic, 2 uniformed police officers stepped forward, their expressions stern. One held up a warrant for her arrest. Cassandra Hayes, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. We have a warrant for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Cassandra gasped, collapsing against the polished marble wall as the officers calmly took her into custody. Eleanor and Michael watched the scene unfold from the office window, a grim satisfaction mixing with the profound devastation etched on Michael's face. He was overwhelmed, relief washing over him in waves, but leaving behind an unbearable ache for all that had been lost and betrayed. Attorney Thompson confirmed that the evidence Arthur had meticulously gathered was overwhelming, making it a straightforward legal case against both Cassandra and Nolan King. Eleanor gently led Michael home, where he spent the next few days in a haze of anger, shame, and grief. He berated himself constantly. "How could I have been so stupid, Mom?" He'd repeat, his voice hoarse. "So blind." Eleanor held him, stroking his hair, her heart aching for her son. "You weren't stupid, honey," she'd reassure him. "You were trusting. And that's a good quality, even if it sometimes gets taken advantage of." She explained Arthur's deliberate plan, the reason he had waited to expose Cassandra. "Your father knew you would blame yourself, Michael," Eleanor explained softly. "He wanted you to see the truth, undeniable, so you wouldn't carry this burden of guilt. He protected you, even after he was gone." Michael looked at her, a fresh wave of tears in his eyes, finally understanding the depth of his father's enduring, unconditional love. Arthur had shielded him, even in death, from the cruelest cut. Attorney Thompson visited a few days later to formalize Arthur's will. It was, as expected, ironclad. The house, all significant investments, and the majority of his assets were bequeathed to Eleanor, ensuring her complete financial security. But Arthur, ever thoughtful, had also made provisions for Michael. He revealed that years ago, Arthur had formally and legally adopted Michael, making him, in the eyes of the law, his only legitimate child. This detail, kept secret until now, was a powerful affirmation of Arthur's love. Michael received a substantial inheritance of $250,000, along with half ownership of the beloved lake cabin, securing his financial independence and giving him a tangible piece of his father's legacy. The legal proceedings were swift. Cassandra was sentenced to 3 years in prison, a punishment tempered by her lack of prior offenses. But she was also ordered to pay full restitution for the funds she had extorted. Nolan King, with his history of similar fraudulent activities, received a harsher sentence of 5 years. The community, once gossiping with a scandal, now rallied around Eleanor and Michael. Arthur's detailed recordings and Attorney Thompson's clear presentation of the facts had validated the unspoken suspicions many had harbored about Cassandra. Sympathy and support poured in, and Eleanor found a renewed sense of connection with her neighbors and friends. In the months that followed, Eleanor found hope for the future blossoming in her heart. Cassandra's despicable actions, while causing immense pain, had paradoxically brought her and Michael closer, forging an unbreakable bond rooted in shared understanding and resilience. It had also underscored Arthur's profound wisdom and foresight, transforming his memory from one of recent loss to one of enduring, protective love. One afternoon, Michael, for the first time since the funeral, genuinely smiled. He was helping Eleanor sort through some of Arthur's old belongings, and they stumbled upon a faded photograph of Arthur, young and beaming. "He always told me," Michael reminisced, a lightness in his voice Eleanor hadn't heard in ages. "No matter what anyone else does, you just keep being good yourself." 6 months after the dramatic will reading, life began to turn a corner. Michael, free from the toxic entanglement of his marriage, started dating Jessica Miller, a kind and gentle kindergarten teacher he met through a mutual friend. His laughter returned, a melody Eleanor had sorely missed. Eleanor, feeling stronger and more independent than she had in years, finally began to plan her long-deferred trip to Ireland. Arthur's memory was no longer a fresh wound, but a warm blanket wrapped around her heart, a constant presence that infused her with courage. She established a scholarship fund in Arthur's name for aspiring history teachers, a fitting legacy for a man who had dedicated his life to education. As she packed for her trip, Eleanor found Arthur's final, most personal letter to her, tucked away in a hidden compartment of his old desk. It was filled with his characteristic love and gentle encouragement. "My dearest Eleanor," it read, "live the life we planned together. Just live it for both of us now. Find joy, find adventure, and know that my love for you will always be a guiding light." The letter concluded with a powerful message that resonated deep within her soul. Love always wins in the end. She read parts of the letter to Michael, solidifying their bond and shared understanding, giving them both a sense of closure and hope. Eleanor's journey to Ireland was a revelation. She found peace in the rolling green hills, joy in the vibrant music of Galway, and adventure in exploring ancient castles. She raised a pint of Guinness in a lively pub, looking out at the wild Atlantic, a quiet smile on her face. Arthur's love, she realized, had not only protected them from Cassandra's greed, but it had ultimately set them free, allowing them to embrace new beginnings and celebrate the enduring triumph of love over deceit.